이제 급격한 뭐 혈구 감소 등 이런 것이 있고, 그다음에 만성으로 가면 뭐 기능 손상 등 일부는 있을 수 있고 회복하지만 아까 말씀드린 이제 그런 염증이 좀 가라앉지만 일부 남아 있고, 특히 항암 몇 개월만으로도 약 4, 5년간 노화가 된다고 합니다. 기력 저하가 심한 거죠. 우리가 겉에 보기에는 괜찮아 보이시지만, 그래서 이분들을 다시 이제 회복할 수 있는 시스템들이 필요하고, 가장 많이 통증, 피로, 불면, 우울, 불안인데 그게 이제 단순히 치료만이 아니고 이 젊은 유방암 환자 같은 경우에는 애가 이제 2, 3살이면 잠을 못 잡니다. 그래서 힘들고, 일을 지금 가장일에서 해야 되는 또 여성분은 치료 받으면서도 항암 받으면서도 하루에 8, 10시간씩 일하고 이런 것들이 여러 가지 이슈가 있어서 단순히 증상만으로 환자를 돌볼 수가 없는 거고, 그러다 보니까 특히 이런 통합의학센터가 각 암센터에 대부분에서 갖추어져 있고, 아까 말씀드린 그런 침술, 마사지, 메디테이션은 특히 잘 활용되고 있습니다. 그래서 뉴욕의 메모리얼 슬론 캐터링에서는 말씀드린 증상 관리와 전인적 케어를 목표로 부작용 관리, 그다음에 마음 건강 관리, 근력 운동 등을 이제 얘기하고 있고, 특히 명상에서는 아까 들으신 그런 효과, 불안 감소 등등을 위해서 통증, 피로도 감소를 위해서 제공한다. 치료 시기별로 플러스 또 어떤 종류의 치료냐에 따라서, 그리고 증상에 따라서 명상의 종류를 합니다. 우리가 생각하는 여기서 하는 6주, 8주 이런 명상이 아니고, 명상을 어떻게 보면 가볍게 생각할 필요도 있을 것 같습니다. 우리가 쉽게 접근하려면 지금 현재에 집중하고 마음의 평정심 이런 걸 유지한다고 생각하면, 그래서 제공자에 따라서 이완요법을 하는, 아니면 호흡법을 주는, 이제 불면증에 주는 요가 니드라를 포함하고 불안 관리 등등을 이렇게 이제 나누어서 이제 최신 버전입니다. 그리고 이거는 이제 하버드에서는 이제 각 센터별로 연구하는 주제가 달라서, 여기는 특히 이제 무브먼트, 태극권, 기공 이런 쪽 연구도 많이 하지만 다양한 요법들의 이제 어떤 최신 지견이 있는지 책자를 내고 있습니다. 그래서 여러분 다 들으신 MD 앤더슨은 이렇게 이제 미국치고는 비가 별로 비싸지 않은데, 이렇게 되면 좀 꾸준히 할 수도 있고, 저희 나라는 보험도 안 되지만 피가 전혀 안 되기 때문에 약간의 그 허들 내지는 장애가 되는 요소도 있는 것 같고요. 좀 더 활성화시키는 요소가 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 그래서 저희와 못지않게 이제 아침부터 저녁까지 프로그램이 있습니다. 우리나라 같으면 이제 경기지역암센터, 제가 속한 아주대 병원은 일찍 이제 이런 암 환자의 통합치료에 관심이 있어서 그거를 이제 저희가 그래서 모델을 구축하고 각 지역암센터에서, 우리나라에는 13곳의 지역암센터에 통합지지센터가 있습니다. 그래서 환자가 오면 어느 정도 힘든지, 어떤 요소들인지, 그리고 여기 영적 종교적 문제는 2년 전에 첨가되어서 그 또한 파악하는데, 장기 생존자의 경우에 이런 이슈로 오는 분들이 종종 있습니다. 그래서 프로그램은 이렇게 코로나 때문에 온라인화돼서 더 많이 확산될 수도 있고, 저 위에 거는 저는 이제 걷기 명상 플러스 제대로 걷기 이슈를 이제 접붙여서 환자에게 활동적인 것도 하고, 또 이제 더 나가서는 후에 이제 얕은 아주대에는 뒷산이 있어서 등산하는 법까지 이제 반나절 코스로 운영하기도 합니다. 그래서 다양한 프로그램들 중에 저는 이제 이런 이완 명상 교실을 운영하고 있습니다. 이제 이완 명상 교실의 백그라운드를 잠시 설명드리면, 암 환자들은 긴장하고 불안하고 본인이 긴장한지도 모르고 평생 그러고 살아서, 그래서 그거를 일깨워주는 것도 필요하고, 저도 명상할 때 처음에는 이완 요소를 먼저 하고 저 스스로 도움도 됐었습니다. 그래서 의사가 하는 거 외에 하버드 대학의 닥터 벤스는 의사가 하는 거 외에 본인이 할 수 있는 게 있다. 그거는 배울 수 있고, 다양한 호흡법과 바디 스캔, 마음 챙김 등등이 도움을 준다. 또 시간이 없으면 교회 가시는 분은 주기도문 외우라고 그러고 각각에 따라서 활용하기도 합니다. 저희 프로그램에서는 시간이 될 때 아우토겐 트레이닝, 호흡 조절, 그다음에 이제 심상 명상 어떻게 하는지 어떤 사례를 보여드릴 거고, 점진적 근육 이완은 첫날 환자들이 몸을 긴장하고 이완하는 걸 스스로 지켜보게, 그래서 알아차림에 큰 근육으로 할 수 있는 걸로 시작합니다. 아우토겐 수련은 저는 어떤 연유로 2000년도 초기에 배웠고, 닥터 슐츠라는 1930년도 후반에 독일 의사가 남을 치면 둔다면 나 스스로는 못할까로 시작하였습니다. 명상의 효과는 우리 이미 알고 있고, 아까 이미 앞에서 들으신 대로 저도 이제 영국에서는 그 숨 참는 거 해가지고 이제 순환이 잘 된다는 걸 듣고 좀 애드하고, 물론 그 전에도 긴장한 사람이 많아서 우리 명상의 호흡법, 환자를 누워서 관찰하면서 호흡을 잘 할 수 있도록 하긴 했지만, 이제 이런 데이터가 나옴으로써 이제 좀 더 강화하기로 했습니다. 2년 전부터. 여기 보시면 날숨을 2배로 길게만 해도 불안이 한 달 만에 감소하고, 이거를 실제로 제가 외래에서 긴장해서 치료 끝나고 나면 살짝 어지럽고 불안한 사람들한테 하면 일주일 만에 안정제 없이 치료가 가능하고 쉽습니다. 그래서 이거를 했더니 저희 직원은 자기 아들한테 시험 볼 때 막 흔들리는데 이거 하고 나서 시험을 떨지 않고 봤다고. 그래서 정말 효과 있습니다. 그래서 이것만 해도 호흡법의 중요한 걸 알 수 있고, 아까 이미 들으신 대로 요가에서 하는 뭐 숨을 참는다거나 양초포를 한다거나 그거에 대한 우리 순환 내지는 면역 증가 좋은 효과가 있어서, 이제 그 명상 둘째 날에 일부는 호흡법을, 건강되는 호흡법을 이제 강조하고 있습니다. 제가 이제 환자한테 비유하고 이해시키기 위해서 사용하는 영화를 몇 번 보여드리겠습니다. 쿵어팬더 2에서는 평정심에 대해서 얘기가 많이 나옵니다. 그래서 우리가 마인드 컨트롤을 하면 우리 기량이 어떻게 향상되고, 트라우마는 어떻게 몰랐던 트라우마가 해결되고, 그래서 굉장히 좋은 거고, 시간상 오늘은 다 못하고, 평정심은 상처는 치유되지만 흉터는 흐려지나 지난 일은 의미 없고 중요한 건 지금 무엇을 선택하는가다. 이게 이제 저희의 명상의 모토가 아닌가 생각합니다. 그리고 인사이드 아웃 영화 보신 분 많으시리라고 봅니다. 특히 2를 보시라고 하고 싶은데, 1에서는 감정과 의식의 체계, 아까 얘기 들으신 대로 경험에 의해서 우리의 성격 형성, 그리고 나라는 걸 형성하는 걸 그림, 이 애니메이션으로 너무 잘 보여주고 있습니다. 인사이드 아웃 2는 정말 무릎을 탁 칠 정도였습니다. 여기 보시면 이제 불안해하는 사춘기 딸의 불안이가 나옵니다. 저 빨간 거는, 빨간 줄은 얘가 이제 경쟁할 때마다 잘해야 돼, 힘들어 막 이러고 불안에 떨어서 미친 듯이 돌아가는 그런 영상이 나옵니다. 우리가 자주 사용하는 감정의 회로든 정보든 에너지든 어떻게 해석하든 그 뒤에는 많은 믿음, 관념, 개념들이 있을 거고, 저 자주 사용하는 걸 알아차려서 한 번만 참아가고 아까 가는 블로크를 한다면 이제 불안이 가라앉고, 그런 게 이제 알아차림의 시작이라고 생각하고 얘기하고, 여기에는 또 의식의 흐름이 잘 보입니다. 피자 생각하면 피자가 떠오르고 브로콜리 떠오르고, 그래서 우리가 생각은 관찰할 수 있다는 것을 설명하기도 좋습니다. 그래서 이런 의미에서 또 하나의 영화는 디즈니가 엄청난 영화들을 하는데, 소울이라는 거 보면 저렇게 무기력하고 영혼 없는 그런 이제 로스트 소울이라고 해서, 여러분 도깨비 드라마 보면 이제 기억이 나시는 장면이 있을 거예요. 시꺼먼데 수백 년 동안 있었던 그런 것도 보여주고, 다음 생을 준비하는 영혼에서 어떻게 선택을 하고 이 지구가 공부하는 곳이다. 저희 지구가 공부하는 곳이라는 거는, 인생은 학습의 장이라는 예전에 어떤 책이 있어서, 제가 말기암 환자인데 80대 노인 할머니고 폐암이고 이제 몇 개월 안 나오셨습니다. 그래서 이제 치료는 하지만 그분한테 제가 이제 여러 가지 이제 경험을 통해서 뭔가 이제 힘든 거는 놓고 가시게. 그래서 가장 뭐 힘드냐 그러면, 많은 경우에 우리 이제 저 할아버지가 나를 힘들게 해서 평생 힘들었다. 그때 이제 제가 하는 말이, 그러면 이제 그걸 놓고 다음에 똑같이 재수하고 싶으시냐면 당연히 아니죠. 재수 싫다고. 그때 이제 문구를 써드립니다. 너 저 할아버지가 사느라고 잘 살았다. 나는 나를 사랑한다. 이렇게 문구를 써줘서 이제 보내드립니다. 그래서 그때그때 따라서 이런 공부가 저를 이제 환자한테 활용하게 하고, 아까 아우라는 얘기를 했는데 여기도 보면 삶의 의미는 매 순간 알아차려서 행복감 찾고 즐거움을 찾고 그런 순간이라는 걸 보여주는 게 이제 첫 번째 장면입니다. 그래서 다 설명할 수는 없고요. 여기 보면 이 환자는 아까 말씀드린 대로 수술 자리가 2, 3개월째 잘 안 났는데 이거 치료에 부작용일 수 있지만 실제로는 남편이 투병 중이어서 또 이면에 다른 요소가 있다는 거죠. 그래서 그걸 확인하면 간병인 내지는 정서적 지지가 필요하고, 이 투병범 환자는 부작용 물론 있을 수 있는데 환자가 유난히 화를 내고 이제 의료진을 힘들게 하니까 저한테 보내셨는데, 이제 첫날은 이완요법하고 그 다음에 명상 좀 하고 저희 리트리트 프로그램 숲속에 가는 게 있었습니다. 결국은 몇 주 만에 이제 못 먹던 면을 먹고 노래도 6개월 만에 하고, 그 이면에는 어렸을 때 있던 화였습니다. 그래서 이런 것들이 풀리면서 증상도 좋아지는 경험도 하게 됩니다. 그래서 중요한 거는 환자와의 라포, 그냥 명상이 아니고 그 사람과의 대화로 피드백 받는 게 중요하다고 생각합니다. 이 환자 경우에는 치료하고 상관없는데 시기상 결국 보면 MRI 때 머리가 그 이후에 머리가 깨질 듯이 아프다. 근데 보면은 치료하고 상관없어서 무슨 일이 있었냐 했더니 MRI 때 너무 흔들어서 머리를 씌웠고, 그래서 그러면 다친 경험 있냐고 하니까 본인은 없다고 머리를 흔드십니다. 그래서 환자를 이렇게 얼굴 쳐다보다가 이마에 보이시는지 모르지만 상처가 있었습니다. 그래서 무슨 상처냐 했더니 이거는 8개월쯤에 이제 기어가다가 아궁이에 빠져서 다쳤습니다. 그래서 그 트라우마 때문에 생긴 이제 반응이었고, 그걸 이제 같이 이제 회상하고 이제 덜어주는 그런 프로그램을 이제 개인적인 진료실에서 한 이유 경험도 있습니다. 이제 아토피 환자가 병원 학교를 안 가겠다고 해서 소아과 선생님이 보내줬는데 불면증을 얘기하고, 아까 아우토겐 엄마한테 간단히 가르쳐줘도 아이한테 했더니 잠자게 되고, 이제 어른들도 하지만 가끔 아이들은 이제 이렇게 그림을 그리게 하고 너를 그리라고 했더니 이걸 그렸습니다. 그래서 제 느낌을 얘기했더니 로켓은 약해 보이는데 화력이 좀 세 보이네 했더니 저 화력은 제 화예요. 무슨 화 그랬더니 더 심한 아토피에가 못 살게 구는 거였고, 그래서 뭘 하고 싶냐 했더니 제목을 심한 복수라고. 근데 그림을 보니까 그러면 너도 다치고 걔도 다치고 어떻게 하고 싶냐 했더니 이제 그럼 제가 강해지고 뭐 이런 거로 해서 이제 자기 꿈을 얘기하고 마무리했던 케이스입니다. 그래서 개인적으로도 하고 이렇게 다른 데서 느꼈던 부작용을 병원 방문 때마다 느끼는 그런 부작용을 이제 심상요법으로 저희가 이제 도와주기도 하고, 이 환자 경우에는 이미 불안감으로 약을 먹는데 암 진단 내서 이제 더 힘들고, 그래서 아까 말씀드린 저는 감사 리스트 쓰는 걸 많이 활용합니다. 긍정적인 정서를 좀 끌어내기 위해서. 그래서 본인이 이제 허락하고 저렇게 열심히 써와서 이제 긍정적인 마음이 생기고 이제 명상도 하게 되고 다음 주에 한 번 더 만나고 있습니다. 어떤 환자는 직장에 돌아가야 되는데 이제부터 잠이 다시 안 오고 걱정이 많습니다. 그럴 때 이제 시간이 없습니다. 이제 직장 돌아가면 뭐 명상할 수도 없고 시간도 없고, 그럴 때 이제 진짜 생각인지 이제 글쓰기를 같이 해봅니다. 재발은 누구나 하는 게 아니고, 재발을 할 수 있다면 내가 할 수 있는 게 뭔지, 직장의 의미는 나한테 뭐고 잘 갈 수 있게 이제 그런 의미를 부여하는 것도 같이 하고 있습니다. 그래서 외래에서 아까는 어떤 분은 호흡법, 아우토겐 훈련으로 위경련을 잡는 경우도 있고, 사랑 명상은 스스로의 이 의미 부여와 그다음에 자책감 덜하게 감사 리스트, 글쓰기 등을 이제 외래에서 저는 조금 길게 보는 편이고요, 활용하고 있습니다. 그래서 이제 이완 명상 프로그램들을 저는 이제 보건소에서 해서 2007년도부터 했고, 지역암센터에서 처음에는 환자가 그냥 오는 대로, 왜냐면 아파서 못 오기도 하고 하니까. 근데 코로나를 기점으로 이제 온라인으로 바뀌면서 처음에는 이제 시도상 1대1, 1대2로 하다가 이제 6주 회기제로 하고 있습니다. 그래서 지금은 이제 10시간이 8시 반에 하지만 아까 말씀드린 대로 첫 주는 점진적 근육은 프로그레시브 머슬 릴렉세이션으로 해서 호흡 명상과 사랑 명상 이제 기본적으로 가져가고 바디 스캔으로 내 몸을 알아가는 거를 이제 그 세 가지를 강조하고 있습니다. 그래서 한 시간을 못 내는 분은 초심자 반이라고 해서 한 2시간 반 이제 김밥도 같이 공유하면서 이제 환자의 불안감 다스리는 이런 요법들이 있고 언제나 참석할 수 있다고 하고, 그래서 이렇게 병행함으로써 아까 들으신 대로 이제 호흡에 더 중요한 데이터 나오면 이제 그걸 강화하는 프로그램을 넣고 조금씩 이렇게 심화 내지는 정교화되는 것 같습니다. 그래서 저희 직원이 직장인들이 못 들어오는데 어떻게 할까요? 해서 지금은 이제 새벽 6시 반에 이제 제가 2번 했는데 거의 30-40명이 들어오십니다. 그래서 성공적이라는 표현보다는 많은 요구도가 있다는 것을 알 수가 있고, 네, 그들의 경험을 말하는 프로그램, 환자들 얘기하는 것도 중요하다고 생각하고, 특히 바디 스캔을 저는 비파사나에서 하는 바디 스캔 여러 방법이 있는데 그거로 해서 오랜 불면증을 약으로도 안 듣는 불면증을 낫게 되는 분이 꽤 있습니다. 그러니까 의식은 깨어 있는데 반응 안 하는 연습이 잘 되는 것 같습니다. 그래서 이제는 코로나 시기에 직원들이 너무 힘들고 해서 이제 병원장님을 비롯한 직원 먼저 팀장님이 해드리겠다고 해서 시작했고, 처음엔 다 마스크 쓰고 하고, 그 다음에는 이제 일반 직원들을 해서 20명을 이제 제한을 두고, 여기에는 의료진의 에너지 고갈, 아까 엠퍼시 퍼티그 내지는 컴패션 퍼티그를 좀 방지하는 그런 쪽을 좀 강조해서 해드리고 있고, 본교에서도 요청해서 여기는 시간적 여유가 있어서 8주 프로그램을 해서 좀 더 탄탄하게 했던 것 같습니다. 그래서 마무리는 이제 호스피스 사별 프로그램에 이제 환자가 너무 아프면 거기는 아니고 환자 가족들을 아시다시피 그런 프로그램을 하고자 해서 제가 도대체 뭘 해야지 1시간 안에 이분들한테 명상으로 도움되나 생각하고 고민했는데, 가서 이제 얘기를 나누면 어떤 팀은 정말 눈물을 펑펑 5가족이 계속 흘리고, 어제 같으면 또 그런 게 좀 덜했습니다. 어제 세 번째 가족팀을 했는데 그 팀마다 좀 달라서, 중요한 거는 제가 시작한 게 먹기 명상으로 하니까 내가 먹는 동안 슬픔이 없네, 감정이 분리되는 거 볼 수 있고, 사랑 명상의 일부 초기 이제 자기 자신에 대한 거를 하면 나 자신이 중요하고 내가 있고 그 사람도 잘 갔겠지 이런 거를 해서 한 얘기 나누고 40-50분 안에 그래도 소통을 제가 인핸스 시키고 환자들도 도움이 되었다는 얘기를 들었습니다. 그래서 이렇게 관계 형성과 이제 너무 무겁지 않게 우리가 현재 할 수 있다는 의미의 다양한 명상 요법을 이제 활용할 수 있다는 걸 말씀드리고, 그룹별로 좀 강조하는 게 다릅니다. 이렇게 마무리는 항상 우리 이제 고주파, 아까 말씀드린 감마를 높이기 위해서 사랑하고 감사합니다를 강조하고, 저를 가르치신 모든 분들 환자에게 감사합니다.
네, 멋진 강연이었습니다. 감사드립니다. 네, 이제 질문 답변 시간인데요. 현장에 계신 여러분들께 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다. 좋은 강연 들으시면서 여러분 개인적으로 질문이 있거나 아니면 강연 내용에 궁금한 점이 있으면 자신 있게 한번 손 들고 질문해 주시기 바랍니다. 크게 들어주세요. 네, 저쪽 우리 저 가운데 계신 우리 하얀 옷 입은 우리 여성분, 가운데 계신 가운데.
네, 안녕하세요. 정미석 교수님, 일단 암으로 고통받는 환자분들에게 이렇게 명상을 적용해서 좋은 내용으로 강의를 해주셔서 너무 감사합니다. 제가 궁금한 점은 지금 일단 아주대 병원이나 지금 계신 이 암센터에서는 이렇게 명상을 잘 적용을 해서 암 환자들의 치유를 돕고 있는 걸로 보이는데요. 이게 의료계에서 이제 우리나라의 많은 병원들이 미국의 암센터 병원들처럼 이제 명상이 치료적으로 잘 들어가는 게 이제 앞으로 굉장히 중요한 과제가 될 것 같습니다. 그래서 의료 현장에서 이런 정보들이 서로 공유가 되고 명상이 암 환자 치유에 효과가 있고 그래서 이거를 이제 병원에서 어떻게 적용할 수 있을지에 대한 그런 논의가 있는지가 좀 궁금합니다.
논의는 없습니다, 선생님. 아까 말씀드린 대로 좀 피가 된다면 저희 같이 공부했던 분한테 일부는 이제 호흡법에 대해서 해서 이제 저희가 그 사업비에서 드리고도 하는데 이게 피 내지는 여유가 없으면 그게 활성화되기는 좀 힘든 것 같습니다. 그래서 좀 앞으로는 더 나아지겠죠, 선생님. 근데 논의되는 거는 없어서 아쉽습니다, 저 또한.
네, 한 가지 질문만 더 받도록 하겠습니다. 다음 연사분이 기다리고 계셔서요. 예, 우리 가운데 방금 손 들어주신 우리 부산
강의 되게 감명 깊게 들었고요. 지금 이제 어떻게 보면은 이제 의사분이신데 하시는 활동이나 영역은 굉장히 심리학 전문가들이 하시는 그 치료의 기법과 수준에 이르는 것 같아서 되게 존경스러웠습니다. 근데 이제 이 역할들이 아까 말씀하셨듯이 의사가 하기에는 비용이 너무 높기 때문에 되게 이제 심리학 관련 사회사업가라든가 임상심리 전문가라든가 이제 이렇게 같이 협동하시는 경우들이 있을 것 같은데 혹시 그런 네트워크가 구축되어 있으신지 어떤 부분들을 같이 협력하고 계신지 궁금합니다.
실은 정신과가 너무 바빠서요. 다 보실 수가 없고 불면증 하나만으로도 최근에 의료대란 때문에 더 심화됐습니다. 그래서 저는 이제 핫라인으로 저희 병원에는 조성미 교수 유명한 분도 있어서 어떤 케이스는 전화 걸어서 물기도 하고 핫라인으로 이제 저희 환자가 아들 자살 때문에 걱정하면 이제 거기는 빠르게 보도록 다 저는 이제 구축되어 있습니다. 그래서 병원 내에서는 저희 정신건강, 마음건강 클리닉이 있어서 저희 병원은 잘 돼 있는 편입니다. 그리고 아까 말씀하신 대로 제 과가 방사선 치료다 보니까 하루에 막 100명씩 보는 외래가 아니고 또 저는 좀 제가 시간을 쓰다 보니까 조금 가능하지 않았을까 생각하고 이 근원적인 거를 가지 않으면 아까 산부인과 선생님이 얘기한 것처럼 또다시 되돌이표돼서 또 다른 건강을 잃을 수도 있고 그래서 파악하게 되었습니다.
혹시 심리학회라든가 다른 걸로 좀 더 이렇게 확대해서 연구 사업을 하시던가 그런 쪽에 혹시 의사나 관심은 있으신지?
오면 할 수도 있겠지만 제가 이제 나이가 그러기에는 환자하고 대화하고 이것만으로 시간이 좀 부족한 것 같습니다. 제가 잘하는 상담 또 암환자 생존자들이 외부에서도 많이 오고요. 서울에서도 오고 그러면 보통 30분 내지 40분 보거든요. 어떤 분은 환자는 유골암을 3개월씩 안고 있는 근데 그거 이면에는 주변 사람들이 많이 최근에 돌아가셔서 그래서 그런 인과관계 그리고 제가 이제 암을 전공하다 보니까 그런 감정과 암의 요소, 증상 요소들을 이제 같이 봐줘서 좀 더 잘 다루는 거 아닌가 생각합니다.
네, 멋진 강연 그리고 명쾌한 응답까지 모두 감사드립니다. 정민성 교수님께 다시 한번 큰 박수 한번 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 심신요법을 암 치료하고 돌봄에 접목해서요 환자의 삶의 질을 높이는 임상 경험 그리고 그 치유의 가능성에 대해서 강연해 주셨습니다. 제6회 서울국제명상엑스포를 위해서 많은 분들께서 찾아주셨는데요. 본 행사는 온라인을 통해서도 많은 분들이 지금 함께하고 계십니다. 이 자리에 부득이 함께하지 못한 동료분들, 도반분들께 유튜브 채널을 통해서요 참고도 꼭 알려주시면 감사하겠습니다. 네, 오늘의 네 번째 세션입니다. 마음 체계 기반 식사 알아차림 훈련인 MB이트 핵심 개발자이신
inviting me, for welcoming me. I am so happy to be here. I've heard so many wonderful presentations and just feel blessed and honored to be able to be part of this program. I want to start by acknowledging some of the people that I have worked with over the years at my own university, Indiana State University. My first name is one of my graduate students, and then my colleagues there. I'll be sharing data, research data from a very large study from NIH that I could not have done without Dr. Ruth Walliver, who was at Duke University, who is now at Vanderbilt University. And then our next set of NIH-funded studies those Duke studies were also NIH-funded, were at the University of California, San Francisco. My primary colleague was Dr. Alyssa Eppel, but also other associates of hers played incredible, valuable roles in all of this research. We're going to have two parts to this program. And more of the first part is actually going to be giving you some experiential sense of what we mean by mindful eating. And then the next part, and I will be talking about some of the theory, also some of our research findings, but then I'm going to go back into the research that we have done. And by that point, you'll have a better understanding of what the program involves. For this next set of slides, what I want you to do is just look at them. Notice what your feelings are. Notice what your reactions are. You'll see what I mean in a moment. How hungry are people here? We just had lunch. Perhaps not that very hungry. So look at that. I have a close Korean colleague in my Department of Psychology at Indiana State University who helped me get those pictures, I want to say. That is not an American hamburger. Do you want that more or less? So there's no right or wrong answer to how much you might want any one of those dishes or when you would want it. But it is helpful to notice what is calling you. It's also helpful to notice serving sizes. This is a bit of a joke, but in the US, what we call supersizing it has really become an important part of people's choices in food. And I'll be talking about why that has some problems. I've never even seen a hamburger like that, but I do understand they exist. Can't imagine eating it. But then now let's go to the question, what is mindless eating and snacking? Does anybody here ever eat mindlessly? We all do, at times. But how do we perhaps do it less rather than more? What is it? Not paying attention to our physical hunger signals, eating for all other kinds of reasons, which we will do. The food is there. It's noon, it's time for lunch. Well, I had breakfast at 9. I'm not that hungry, but it's time for lunch. Thoughts, I deserve this. Feelings, stressed. Actually, one of the most frequently identified triggers for eating in high school students was boredom. It's also a pretty high one for other people too. Not paying attention to the quality of taste, both at first and as it decreases. Why eat something if you're not tasting it? You might enjoy it more if you do. Or perhaps realize you're eating something you don't like very much. Not paying attention to how full you are. Keeping on eating just because the food is there. Until you're actually uncomfortable. And choosing foods without considering the nutritional value at all. The calories, the fat content, the health effects. We actually make hundreds of small decisions every day about what we want to eat. When, where, what, how much, etc. When do I take the next bite? And which type of food do I choose? And having had the pleasure of eating Korean food for the last few days, and I have been here once before, so I knew what to expect and was looking forward to it. Lunch, we had 10 different foods served to us. I think it might have been more. And so choosing those mindfully can actually help us enjoy the food more rather than less. How many of these decisions, though, are highly habitual, conditioned reactions and virtually mindless? So the most common solution to this type of, when it's overeating and you've perhaps put on an extra 20 pounds, I'm sorry, I don't know the kilogram equivalents, 20 pounds, 30 pounds, 50 pounds, 200 pounds, like some of my clients, is going on a diet, and another one, and another one, and another one. Now, they may help in the short term, restricting your food to a much smaller amount, perhaps going from 3,000 calories a day or more, you know, some of the super eaters, a lot more, down to 1,200 calories, you're going to lose weight. You're going to get mad at yourself when you break your diet, which you will do, but you will lose weight if you stay with it. And you may also learn things about healthier alternatives. But you get set up in what I call the good food, bad food mentality, so you're constantly judging yourself. There's a sense, a huge sense of deprivation. Almost anybody I've ever talked to, and I will also include myself on that, I've been on a few. This is the main issue. Diets don't teach you how to eat in a balanced or flexible or sustainable way. That's the last one. They cannot be sustained because you're not getting enough food in your body to lose that weight, to keep that going, and you don't learn how to eat at perhaps more consistent with what your long-term goal weight would be. So, as I say, you know how to eat 3,000 calories, you know how to eat half that amount. You don't learn how to eat at a place in the middle that is sustainable, that is fun, that includes every kind of food, but probably in smaller amounts. So the alternatives. There's probably more than just this program, but this is what I'm going to be sharing with you. And I developed this program over the years in several different ways that I will be sharing. So that's what MB Eats stands for, Mindfulness-Based Eating Awareness Training. So mindful eating is paying attention to those physical hunger signals and other eating triggers. Yes, I'm bored, but am I hungry? Okay, I'm bored and I'm hungry. So, okay, this is good. I'll have something to eat. Paying closer attention to taste. Closer attention to fullness. Considering the nutritional values of the food you're eating, and I'll be coming back to this. Fully enjoying your food while you're eating it. Not playing a computer game at the same time, not watching television. If you're eating, eat. If you're eating, enjoy. And this last one, I always get people looking puzzled. Leaving food on your plate if you've had enough. When I work with my group or I'm teaching and I say, how do you know when you're done? When my plate is clean. Well, maybe you didn't know how full you were going to get when you put the food on your plate. Or maybe you didn't put it on your plate. Somebody else did. Believe me, the chef in the kitchen has no idea how hungry you are and how much you need. And it's about creating a better balance between eating your body and the rest of your life that I will be coming back to. So here are some of the research foundations for mindful eating. I started this work because I had, when I was still a doctoral student a long time ago, I will give acknowledgments. It was at Yale University. There were some fantastic people I was able to work with. Tuning into research that was being done on the differences between people responding to their inner signals. As I've mentioned, how hungry are you? How full are you? How much do you actually want and like the food? And those external triggers for eating. This was basic research back, you can see the dates there, 1981. Taste. Hunger, fullness, satiety, and taste. Dr. Linda Bartoshuk was doing the cutting edge work, and she was at Yale, and I was discovering how much that was being explored. But what I also found is that they were looking at general population. It wasn't being applied to people with eating issues. Partly because the people doing it were not people working with patients with eating problems, whereas that was what I was being trained to do. So what are healthier, flexible eating and eating disorders? I did a study with Dr. Judith Roden, where I created a survey of how were the undergraduates, whom we had access to, deciding how to relate to their food, or reporting to us how they related to their food. And we found 4 separate groups. There was one group that I called balanced eaters. And interestingly enough, they said, yes, I eat more if I'm stressed. You know, I didn't think I did very good on that test today, and so I went and got an ice cream cone. But they balanced it out. And then there was a group, mostly women, who agonized over it. Two groups of women. One group that agonized over it, but they didn't have any kind of eating disorder. And then another group that did have eating disorders, but they were still not relaxed about their eating. And so I got a lot of understanding of how flexible, healthier eating patterns can be. They aren't black and white, they aren't rigid, they are flexible. And people would enjoy those ice cream cones. There was then growing knowledge about mindfulness meditation and treatment of anxiety, depression, and addictive disorders. My professor at Yale, Dr. Gary Schwartz, one of his students, Richard Davidson, who you've seen actually been referred to a number of times while he was still a professor at Harvard, was doing really brilliant, they were doing brilliant work on the psychological value of mindfulness meditation. Although I had actually already been introduced to meditation, some of you may know this, it was transcendental meditation. It had a huge value and effect on me, but I was just becoming aware of mindfulness meditation and frankly was being drawn to it more than the work I was been doing with transcendental meditation. That first study down there, that isn't working, though was also a study where we found that undergraduates that we taught mantra-based meditation, drawn from TM, Transcendental Meditation, was in 3 sessions, 3 brief sessions, over a 2-week period, we could train undergraduates at the University of Wisconsin to lower their heart rates by just giving them 3 experiences of mindfulness meditation, of mantra-based meditation. And then when I started working with John Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, we found that the effects on anxiety, which had been, we knew that meditation helped with anxiety. What we found in this study was that it actually took people who had anxiety disorders, and within the 8 weeks of the program, actually cured most of them, which was amazing. And then, a number of years later, after I left UMass Medical School and went to Indiana State University, I had the opportunity to work further with John Kabat-Zinn's program, and we found huge value and effects on people's spiritual well-being. And in a way that showed that increase in spiritual engagement was powerful in actually improving the increase in some of the other effects of the mindfulness meditation program. And we found that also in the MBE program. I'll come back to a little more detail about some of these studies, as I said, a little later. So, again, to come back to some of the theory, mindlessness is that habitual reactivity. We all have it, we all need it. Our brains work extremely quickly. And that's fine, that's good. We're constantly looking for information around us to make use of and respond to or react to. And we attach meaning to it. Is it good? Is it bad? Do I want more? Do I want less? Am I craving something, or am I going to do the best I can to avoid it? There's a spider crawling across the floor, and it's a big one. And much of that happens actually without that much awareness. You're starting to cross a street and suddenly you hear the horn. You want to back up as quickly as possible. Not stand there and, do I want to back up or not? Better get out of the way. So reactions are triggered as rapidly as possible. When that reactivity happens, though, and we do become aware of it, there is a sense of loss of control often, loss of choice, and emotional distress. So to come back to the value of mindfulness now. This is a definition offered by John Kabat-Zinn, who is often considered the father of contemporary mindfulness-based clinical work in the United States and elsewhere. Mindfulness, moment-to-moment, non-judgmental, very important word, awareness cultivated by paying attention. We've been hearing about this from so many of our previous speakers in the last 2 days. I've added to this a cognitive state marked by attentional stability that disengages those habitual reactions and allows for inner wisdom to emerge. Is this completely new to psychology? Not really. But this is part of what I love about what is being contributed to psychology from Eastern philosophies. This is William James, who is often considered the father of psychology. Each of us literally chooses by his way of attending to things what sort of universe he shall appear to himself to inhabit. Written in 1918. So meditation is awareness. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I think you've now realized that you've been introduced to them. Focusing on an object, often repetitive in mindfulness, the breath. A physically awake state is not about can be, but that's not what we're talking about if you're trying to eat. Quiet, detached noting of other thoughts, experiences as they arise, feelings. A gentle return to the original point of focus whenever attention has wandered. So what you're doing is you're increasing awareness of, and you're shifting from reaction to response in a wide range of functioning. So there's different stages. The first stage is that awareness of the reactive process that you're having, very relevant to food intake. The second stage, disengaging that automatic reactivity. And then emergence of that alternative, or several alternatives that are from your wiser mind. And that happens in whatever area you might be engaging with. We're talking about eating right now. So I like to use this slide to show how broad the effects are. And then I'll show actually how all of these also relate to eating. Cognitive, attention awareness, physical, relaxation, neuroregulation. Emotional, that reduced reactivity, uncovering positive emotions. Behavioral, impulse control, and deconditioning. Self and others, acceptance, connectedness, both of others and yourself, and spiritual, inner peace. I've done about 6 studies looking at the relationship of mindfulness and spirituality, and it's very consistent. Now, how do all these relate to eating? They do. Cognitive, awareness of that reactivity to food cues, quieting the mind, less black and white thinking, more non-judgmental awareness. Physiological, of course, reducing stress, but without overeating. Maybe going to that ice cream, but having a small bowl, not the whole container. Better use of hunger, taste, and fullness signals, I'll be coming back to. Emotional, less depression, and more joyful eating. Behavioral, that's pretty obvious. Relationship to self and others, greater self-acceptance. And I have forgiveness of others there because in the groups that I've run, and I've run many of them for MBE, one of the triggers for overeating people will share is anger. And anger that may have gone back to childhood. But also I'll say, what do I do when I go home for the holidays and my mom is going to be very upset if I don't eat everything that she prepared for us? So if you put on a few pounds over Christmas, big deal, right? Have this second piece of cake. You can make up for it later. Tell her how fabulous something was after you've had one piece, and can you have the recipe? And spiritual, connecting with a wiser self and with meaning, purpose, peace, and purpose. Now, staying with the element of the self, I'd like you to take a piece of paper. You could use the back of the handout that was being handed out at the door about the program, or you can take another piece of paper. Just draw a circle on it. A circle of self. And think to yourself, what percentage of your day do you spend thinking or worrying about your eating, your weight, your body? What number comes to you? Write it down, and perhaps, if say it was 50-50, you draw a line down the middle of the circle. If it was 25-75, you draw a quarter of it. Whatever it is, believe me, I'm not going to be collecting them, and we're going to come back to them later. So just put that aside for now, but you'll see why we're coming back to it. So let me give you a little overview of what we have in the program. Nothing's going to be too surprising here. Learning mindfulness and how to bring it into eating experiences. Everybody learns to do mindful meditation practice in our program. Learning to pause for a moment to check in on physical hunger and versus other triggers. Mindfully choosing foods for both enjoyment and nutritional value. We do, partway through the program, we do a potluck where people bring in, everyone who's in the group, say 10 or 12 people, bring in 2 foods to share with everyone else. One of them is supposed to be a healthier food. By the time we do that, they know what I mean. The other is supposed to be a more just indulgent food. Maybe they already eat it or overeat it, but they want to keep it in their list of foods that they want to have pleasure from. So to bring that in also. We try and make sure that everybody isn't bringing in cake, but it varies. Tuning into taste and pleasure from moment to moment instead of guilt or the television or whatever while you're eating. And choosing mindfully when to stop eating. Learning to be both balanced and flexible, and to relate to food and food choices in a way that is sustainable. So the inner wisdom, I'm going to go through this quickly. It's pretty much repeating. But for people who are, we run programs that are for people with binge eating disorder, eating excessively large amounts of food, either for a snack or a meal, at least once a week. Food-related meditations, raisins, chocolate, cheese and crackers, potluck meal and buffet, and we have some others. Mini meditations with daily meals and snacks. Mini meditations, if you're aware, there are some programs that they call a brief meditation, a 3-minute meditation. We can say, you can take 3 seconds. You just stop, you focus, you make a choice. Even about the next bite. You don't need to take 3 minutes to do that. Forgiveness and wisdom meditations. And letting go of that weight and eating preoccupation, which I just gave you an introduction to. And at home, meditation practice and mindful eating practice. So, let me give you another tool here. What we do is we ask people to actually have come into into that session. It's, by the way, it's 8 sessions plus 2 follow-up sessions, or actually there's variations, but I'll say 10 sessions and 2 follow-up sessions is more standard. We ask them to start to notice how hungry they are, physically hungry. How physically hungry. On a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being as hungry as they can imagine, and 1 being not hungry at all. And this uses a tool within psychology that actually began with using this kind of scale for people to look at pain that they were experiencing. And if you've been asked, in the States, most people have been asked that question if they've been to their doctor with anything around pain. On a 10-point scale, how strong is your pain? It can be applied to lots of things. And how full are you? These overlap. They're 2 different processes in our bodies. For example, someone might say, well, I'm sort of hungry, I'm like at a 4, and oh yeah, I think I want a snack, and I'm going to have some popcorn. Well, popcorn, especially the healthier popcorn, doesn't have that many calories in it, but you're going to be feeling pretty full after you've had that whole bag of popcorn. Now what if you take the same number of calories, 250 say, and it's 3 cookies? You're also going to be less hungry, but you aren't going to be very full. So they're two different scales. Now, what is taste satiety? That's actually one of the most important parts of being a mindful eater. We have thousands of taste buds in our mouths. They have 5 different types: sweet, sour, salted, bitter, and savory, using a Japanese word, umami. Our taste buds get tired. They get tired actually in 2 stages, pretty quickly and then longer. And that's what is meant by taste satiety. I apologize, I don't know what that word is in Korean, but it's a word that actually we don't use that often in English either. And I have to explain it and spell it for most people. And it happens in 2 phases, after the first few bites and then after about a portion size. But you gotta be paying attention. Being aware of these changes helps people stop eating sooner and is an important part of mindful eating. Now, we are about to give you the experience of mindful eating. We got ready? Okay. You are going to, the staff is going to be handing out little boxes of raisins.
네, 지금 번 포도를 위해서 지금 나눠드리고 있거든요. 지금 강연 내용에 맞는 그 앱베이트 실습을 하려고 합니다. 그래서 일단 받아두시고요. 우리 강연자님의 지시에 따라 주시기 바랍니다.
You can open them, but do not eat any yet. Yeah, what you can do when you have the box is take out 4 raisins. Just 4 raisins. And put the box aside. Someone will let you know when everybody's got their little box of raisins. Okay, we're okay? Wonderful. So take out your 4 raisins. Now hold them in one hand. And I'd like you to sit in your chair where you are in a balanced, upright position. And I'd like you to close your eyes. Just closing your eyes, bring your awareness to the feeling of the breath at the tip of your nose. Breathing in 2 or 3 deeper breaths, feeling the air flowing in cool, flowing out warmer. Flowing in cool, flowing out warmer. I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on your feeling of hunger at this right now, on that 1 to 10 scale. How hungry are you? There is no right or wrong answer. And then again, on the fullness scale, how full are you? 10 being as full as you can imagine, and 1 being not full at all. And then I'd like you to, staying in this position, just gently look back up on the board, and you'll see, you'll see a taste meter. And see that for the taste, we use we use a meter, and so it's the same 10 points. But what we found is because taste can vary, we liked using the meter better. We actually used this with children. That's when we started using it, and they really liked it. So coming back, closing your eyes again for a moment, coming back to your breath. And taking a look now at the raisins in your hand and choosing 1 raisin. 1 raisin. Keeping in that space of gentle mindfulness. Picking up the raisin and looking at it carefully. No 2 raisins are alike. Looking at it with a sense of curiosity, appreciation. And then closing your eyes and bringing this little piece of fruit up to your nose and smelling it. And then opening it in your mouth and placing the raisin in your mouth without chewing down. Just for a moment or two, experiencing it in your mouth. How is your mouth responding or reacting? And then slowly begin chewing it. Slowly begin chewing it. Noticing any urge to swallow or resisting that. Just keep chewing it, noticing the taste on the top or sensations on the top of your mouth, on your tongue, on the sides of your mouth. Noticing where that pleasure satisfaction meter has gone. How high has it gone? What number is it from 1 to 10? And when you've gotten as much pleasure as you can from this one little raisin, choosing to swallow it and bringing this little piece of nutrition into your body. And after you swallow, just bringing your awareness back to the breath again. Perhaps noticing any flavors that are left in your mouth. Sense of pleasure. And when you're ready, opening your eyes again and looking at the 3 raisins left in your hand, and choosing a second raisin. Choosing a second raisin. And now looking at that raisin. As I said, no 2 raisins are alike. How is this one similar? How is it different? Again, if you've looked at it, closing your eyes, bringing it back up to your nose, smelling it. Is it the same? Or perhaps it's different. That's okay. Just noticing. And again, placing it in your mouth without chewing. Noticing how your mouth is responding. Is it the same as with the first one or different? Just noticing. And now, slowly begin chewing. Again, noticing how your mouth is responding. Where is it responding most in your mouth? As you continue to chew, noticing that taste meter. Perhaps the pleasure has gone higher. Perhaps it's stayed the same. Perhaps it's gone lower. No 2 raisins are alike in that either. And when you've gotten all the pleasure from that second raisin, choosing to swallow and bringing this little piece of nutritional fruit into your body. Keeping your eyes closed for another moment. You might check in with your hunger again. Has that number changed? Now, I'd like you to lead yourself through eating the 3rd raisin. Lead yourself through eating the 3rd raisin. Fully experiencing it. gaining as much pleasure from it as you can. And when you have finished getting as much pleasure as you know, don't forget to notice that taste meter. When you've gotten the pleasure you can from it, choosing to swallow, bringing it into your body. And now I'd like you to consider whether you want the fourth raisin. Whether you want the fourth raisin. If you want the fourth raisin, can you raise your hand? Okay. If you don't want the fourth raisin, can you raise your hand? Yeah, that's about what I usually find. And because we're a little short on time, I'm going to leave it up to you how you're going to eat that fourth raisin, if you want it. We're going to come back now to some more of the program. The outer wisdom that we use is nutrition guidelines. I've had people tell me they don't eat sweets, they don't want to eat a raisin. They say, do you know how many calories are in one raisin? Like 2 or 3? Yeah. Well, how do we usually eat raisins? By the handful. That's a lot more, but we only ate 3 or 4. I had some guy at a program that I was running say, I have diabetes, I'm not supposed to eat sweets. Well, luckily his doctor was in the room, and she said, it's fine. You can eat 4 raisins. We're quality, outer wisdom again, putting quality over quantity. We're a little short on time, so I can't re-elaborate on that, but that's an ongoing intention and goal of the program. Quality over quantity. Calorie awareness, calorie needs, exercise planning. We address all of those. Adapting to personal preferences and patterns. And all of these to be used in a self-accepting, flexible, non-judgmental way, very different from most weight loss diets. And I'm telling, I've used the program with many, many people, many range of people in our California studies. We didn't include, we screened out people who had any kind of binging problem. But other groups have been only with people with binge eating disorders. Some have been with people without any weight issues, but they still wanted to do the program. So, the other thing about the outer wisdom, my mouth is watering at that. But that looks more appealing than just the strawberries. So maybe, what's in the middle? Something like that. So, to consider the choices that you have. So again, I'm coming back, mindful eating, quality over quantity. So I'm going to quickly go through some of our research. We had a NIH-funded randomized clinical trial for people with binge eating disorder. We compared MB-EAT to a waitlist group and a psychoeducational program that was being run very effectively and successfully at Duke University. We varied it. We had 150 people, average age of 46. Average weight, 109 kilograms, 240 pounds. Everyone had binge eating disorder. I've already identified what that means. We had a 9-week program, including some work with body awareness, and followed people up at 1 and 4 months, and a lot of different assessments. You'll see some of them. So we had a significant improvement in the binge eating disorder. 95% of the MBE group were no longer meeting criteria for binge eating disorder versus 76% of the other group. And the binges were significantly smaller in the MBE group if they occurred. Improvement was correlated with the amount of mindfulness practice that they did. They had to track it every week and turn that into us. We found we were a little puzzled by this. There was no average significant weight loss, but a large variation. About a third lost over 10 pounds or 5 kilos at 4 months, but some gained weight. We interviewed them about why that was and what was going on. And we also found that there was improvement in HbA1cs. It was related to decreases in binge episodes, not to the weight change. Just something to keep in mind if you're working in this area. And that's what we found. This is a measure of the power of food scale. I don't have the reference up there. If you're interested, you could contact me. So the control group didn't have anything, didn't change. The Psycho-8 group was in the middle. The MBE group was the best and stayed much better on that measure. This is just what I mentioned about the change in the size of binges in the MBE group. If people reported any binges at all, most of them were small ones. That's the green color. Whereas in the PECB group, only 24% were small. And the waitlist, of course, that was what they started with. Some correlations, something called a binge eating scale. The decreases on that were highly correlated, that's in the first column, highly correlated to the degree people use those mini meditations while they were actually eating. 0.51%, correlation of 0.51, highly significant. And when we combined the amount of meditations they were using altogether, that correlated with all the primary outcome measures, including weight loss. So we found that people who didn't lose weight were less likely to actually be doing the meditations. Again, I'm going to zip through this, but this is the relationship of HbA1cs correlated to change in number of days of binge eating, no correlation with change in weight, and it stayed the same when we controlled for weight change. And again, if you have particular interest in this, I can come back to it. Then we had, based on the study, the results from that study, we did a larger NIH-funded trial where we had only 2 groups, the MBE group with a little more focus on weight loss, waitlist group, sample size 117, average age of 49, almost 50, and again with a body mass index, they had to weigh have a BMI of at least 35 to be in the program, and 25% with binge eating disorder. We wanted to compare what we had found in the other study on binge eating disorder, but we didn't want to exclude other people. 12-week intervention, more on nutrition, diet information, and weight loss components, and we followed them out to 6 months. Extensive other measures. I'm going to zip on through here. The results of those, we were afraid that possibly people with binge eating disorder wouldn't like the addition of some of the nutrition and new education. It didn't make any difference. They were highly parallel, and we had similar success as in the other program, and on a measure of what's called cognitive restraint around eating. There was a sustained weight loss of 3.6 kilograms. Nobody gained weight. And so going through this, you can see the control, we had the control group, and then the pink squares are those who started off with binge eating disorder. You can see they're generally much higher on some of the measures, most of the measures, but drop almost to the level of the non-bingers. This was a measure of what's called disinhibited eating. And that was the weight loss, exactly parallel. And then a measure of what's called cognitive restraint, healthy management of your eating, not over-restraint, exactly the same. And again, the effects of weight loss. And Toronto, we use the Toronto Mindfulness Scale, and we found huge increases in those who are in the MBE program. Just very quickly, I've also been interested in the value of the increase of spiritual well-being in any kind of mindfulness intervention. We found increases in meaning and peace, but with that highly correlated to the depression and anxiety and the binge eating scale. And much more so than the other part of that measure, which was faith, though it still showed some significance. I'm going to jump ahead. You can see how the differences show up there, the green lines going up. Now, coming back to this really quickly, take out your circle. I'm just going to talk you through this because we're really out of time. What percentage of your day do you spend thinking about or worrying about your eating? And then, because we use this, and it's very powerful, and what percentage of your day do you spend on your family, thinking about your family, your work, your hobbies, your friends? I'll let you just reflect on this yourselves. What we had found was that we would get people telling us 65%, 75% of their day was spent worrying about their bodies, their eating, their weight. Then when we asked them, okay, that only leaves 25% to look at all those other areas in your life. Aren't those important too? And there's always this stop. And they go, oh my God. And what they do when we ask them to come back in a week later with whether that number has changed, it's changed dramatically. And the worry about their eating, their weight, has gone down to maybe the 25%. And they actually feel, it's not just changing the numbers, they feel that they're opening up more of their time, more of their thinking to all those other parts of their important parts of their life. So I'm going to have to skip through this. We also have run this study at a variation at University of San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco. We got, again, with no people with binge eating disorder, very comparable effects. So take-home messages, I think you've already heard. Mindful eating, enjoyment. Learn to cultivate the inner gourmet. I like to use that. and this is just a little bit of a couple of people involved in the study that I worked with. I've always been looking for whatever would help me do that without going on and off diets and putting all the weight back on. And I feel really comfortable now. This is going to be okay. I'm at peace at this point. Jane, I use meditation, mindfulness with everything. When I get upset at work, I go in the bathroom and do a mini meditation. Sometimes I count to 10, or I just breathe and I don't binge anymore at all. I mean, I really don't diet and I don't binge at all. And that's just a flash of my book that is available on Amazon. Joy of Half a Cookie. I have a copy with me if you want to actually look at it. And when you find bliss, savor it.
네, 실습 체험까지 해볼 수 있다는 유익한 강의 감사드립니다. 저희가 사전 접수를 받은 당시에 몇 가지 질문들도 사전에 함께 선정해 두었습니다. 지금 질문 드려보도록 하겠습니다. When you took pre-reservations for this event, we also collected questions in advance. I'd like to ask you one of those selected questions now. Is it okay? Question is, when someone struggles with self-criticism, what would be a good way to shift into self-confession? Sorry. First question is, do you have expectations for the mindful eating practice to expand beyond personal application when become part of public policies, such as health center programs, school lunch education, or the national awareness campaigns?
I think it could be brought into any of these. We have worked with children and with adolescents. We have a study that used teenagers, and they did improve in their eating in a high school environment, and had longer term effects on some of these experiences than did the kids. The control group, which were children who teenagers that just stayed in their regular health class. So I'm not sure I can say more about this because we don't have other programs going, but I would be glad to work with anyone who was interested in doing that.
Thank you so much for your precious lecture and Q&A session. Thank you again. 네, 알찬 강연 그리고 명쾌한 질의응답까지 모두 감사드립니다. 네, 뭐 요즘에 미디어, 유튜브나 방송에서 먹방 내지는 뭐 음식에 대한 이야기들이 수도 없이 나오는데요. 우리 지금 크리스텔러 박사님께서 MBET의 원리를 소개해 주셨고요. 그런 마음 챙김 식사가 자기 조절 그리고 건강 증진해 주는 효과를 강연과 실습으로 우리에게 소개해 주셨습니다. 네, 그럼 오늘 마지막 세션입니다. 이번 연사자분은요, 명상콘퍼런스의 연사 초청에 흔쾌히 승낙해 주셨고요. 최상의 컨디션이 아님에도 불구하고 오늘 이 자리에 함께 해주시겠다는 의지로 머나먼 한국까지 방문해 주셨습니다. 그만큼 한국의 위상과 한국에 대한 관심이 높아진 부분에 대해서 준비하면서 새삼 직접적으로 느낄 수 있었습니다. 오래 기다려 주셨습니다. 브라운 대학의 종교학 및 동아시아 교수이신 헤럴드 로스 박사님께서 북미대학의 성찰학 교육에서 명상의 의미라는 주제의 강의를 준비해 주셨는데요. 그럼 큰 박수로 맞이해 보겠습니다.
the time of day when it was at my university very difficult to teach because for the 2:30 classes, students would just be waking up. They would have had breakfast, lunch, and they'd come into class. And especially when I had full classes, usually the back 2 rows would just be kind of in that post-meal haze in which they were slightly dozing off. And of course, I have the kind of voice. And if you would like to do this, please feel free to just relax and doze off and help digest your meal. Very often, the back 2 rows would be completely asleep by the end of the class. And every so often, when I was more mobile and I would walk around with the microphone, I'd just sneak up on the students and I'd ask them a question. Oh, I can't do that today, so I won't. Nobody should be afraid. So, thank you for the very kind intro. My wife, Dr. Taylor, and I have been very, very warmly received and have been truly impressed with the conference and with the work you have done and continue to do here. So I wish to thank some of the many people who have made this possible, the conference possible, and also made it interesting. Dr. Yeon Jae-won, President of Dongguk Yun, the Venerable Jeondo, Chair of the Buddhist Studies Department, and the really visionary organizer of the 6 International Meditation Conferences. The Venerable Ju Kyung, Chair of the Central Council of the Jukye Order, who created the really interesting temple state program that we heard about yesterday. Ms. Bokwe Lee in Buddhist Studies. She's an ABD student. Do you have that term here, ABD? In North America, it means all but dissertation. It means all your coursework is done. You have one final hurdle, and that's to write the dissertation. Of course, that may take, for some people, years. Hopefully, not in Ms. Lee's case. In fact, I'm sure it will. Dr. Sun Chen Bai, who's a management company, very skillfully has managed the conference. And I particularly want to thank the translators who have taken our ideas and in a way that we could never have done, communicated them very effectively to the people in our audience. We really owe a great debt of gratitude to our translators, so please. And I also want to have special appreciation to my wife and life partner, Dr. Liz Taylor, who has been my companion in this very fascinating journey we've taken together almost 4 decades now, and who was a wonderful child psychiatrist who effectively brought healing to many, many hundreds of her patients over the almost 4 decades in which she practiced. So, with all that as a background, let's see. Will this work if I do this? Yeah. So, I would like to begin by talking about, actually, I also want to thank all the other presenters. It's been a wonderful conference. It's been a fascinating conference. And I think what I have to say will touch base with pretty much every one of the talks. And I kind of want to begin by talking about where things were and how far we've come in the last half century in terms of understanding things like, obviously, mindfulness, which really was basically unknown when I was entering college. It was known among scholars of Buddhist studies, but it wasn't really known in the general North American population culture, even academic culture. But also one of the other things that I was, Dr. Chen's talk I found particularly interesting because the whole idea of psychological stress as a factor at all in disease was really completely outside of the mainstream when I first got interested in it in the summer before my entrance into university. So this was, it was a longer time ago than I care to realize. It was the only person who was working in this area was a scientist from McGill named Hans Selye. And I got interested in this because my father had late onset diabetes and had started at a particularly stressful moment in his life. And I thought maybe the stress had had an influence on this late onset diabetes. And I started researching this. And that's the summer before I entered college, I was in a program at the Albany Medical Center. It was a hospital, training hospital in Albany, New York, near where I grew up. And I started talking about this to some of the physicians there, the doctors in training, and they just laughed. They said, "Oh yeah, that person's really not sick, it's all in their head." Sure. And that was, well, it was about 60 years ago. I then wrote a paper, the only paper I ever got an A+ on in all my 4 years in university, even close to an A+, and it was on psychological stress as a factor in the etiology of late onset diabetes. And my preceptor thought it was absolutely, my teaching assistant thought it was a wonderful paper. He said, "You have a future in psychology, come to my lab." Anyway, this just to show you what the gap was between what we heard in the last 2 days and where things were then. So in the new year, I went to his lab and he greeted me with open arms and he said, "Come look, I have something really exciting to show you." And he brought me in and there was a rat laid out in a like a terrarium, and he had cut the top of the rat's head off. And he said, "Watch, look at this." And he took an electrode and he stuck it into part of the rat's brain, and the rat went up. And they took it up, dropped it up. And I went, "Oh, I forgot I had another appointment." Out the window, out the door, not the window. I felt like jumping out the window. So we have come a long, long way. Change happens very slowly, but change does happen. Now, when I got to university and when I ran out of the psychology department, I eventually ended up with a number well, one particularly influential professor. And there you go. His name was Dewey Ming. Professor Dew, as we called him, had just finished a PhD at Harvard. He was from Taiwan, and he was a neo-Confucian. He was a neo-Confucian who was starting to develop his own philosophy of neo-Confucian or neo-Confucianism as an eco-feminist philosophy for the end of the 20th and early into the 21st century. He was a very charismatic figure, and his interest in studying the problem of self-cultivation, how we attain our potential as human beings, our deepest potential as human beings, was something that I found absolutely riveting. And it led me into graduate study. But you know, I went into graduate school with the naive idea that somehow I could pursue a spiritual practice and an academic practice at the same time. And in fact, you can't get enlightened, at least in North America, by studying in an academic institution. Here you have this wonderful blend at this university of academics and practice, academics and practice. There's a really important relationship between them. And, but not in those days, not in the States, in fact still not in North America really. So not only was Professor Dew very important an influence, but he also introduced me to the practice side of the equation, to a Zen master named, Myoshinji Zen master named Joshu Sasaki, who was about to come to the East Coast for the first time. He'd been in the States for 6 or 7 years. And it was a very important engagement for me. I ended up practicing with Sasaki Roshi for over 40 years and being ordained by him. Another important intellectual influence through Professor Du is the Neo-Confucian philosopher Wang Yangming. And as I was developing and thinking about how to bring together the spiritual and the academic, I recall that Professor Du used to talk very much about this empirical orientation of Wang Yangming, who said if you want to know the bitterness of the bitter melon, you have to eat a bitter melon yourself. It's obvious to most people, but not in the academy, not so obvious. And of course, as Dr. Christeller pointed out, William James. And as I again started to think about developing the area of contemplative studies, this is a very inspirational quote from James. The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. Of course, James was a century and a quarter ahead of his time. That's a long way. James was really innovative. And if you haven't read James in translation, or in English if you can, he's a really important thinker, not only a founder of the field of psychology, but also the critical study of religious experience. He wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience, foundational work, very important. Another really important philosopher introduced to me by Professor Du is Nishida Kitaro, the founder of the Kyoto School of Zen. And in thinking about the nature of human experience and contemplative practice these days, I think it's very, very helpful and particularly corrective for my students and for colleagues to try to come to grips with this idea. And it involves actually something that Dave Vaga was talking about today, is the decentering the self. It is not, says Nishida, that experience exists because there is an individual, as most of us think, but that an individual exists because there is experience. Okay, let's redo that. I want to emphasize this again. It is not that experience exists because there is an individual, but that an individual exists because there is experience. This pure experience for Nishida is both pre-reflective and immediate. It transcends both subject and object, self and other, in such a way that it does not contain any specific individual or personal content. So for Nishida, individuality emerges from a continuum of undifferentiated experience. Okay? Now, we started out in contemplative studies very, very early. I taught my first course in which the very radical pedagogical tool of actually doing a contemplative practice in the classroom setting. I taught that for the first time a quarter century ago, last spring. I was very pleased that at the 25th reunion of the class of 2000 at Brown University, 3 of my students from that class came. It was very rewarding to see what they've done with their lives, and that they were still, in some ways, using the tools that we had given them from that class. This contemplative studies initiative started really with that, right around the same time that your Temple Stay program was starting here. And what we were, your Temple Stay program takes the outside world, brings it to the monastery. What we were doing in contemplative studies in some ways is taking the monastery and bringing it into the outside world, into the academy. This is the main page of the website that radically was, for the first time, created in 2005. Now, imagine a world really without the internet, but just the internet just starting, and which websites were almost unheard of. I was very surprised one day. I was walking across the main green, and one of my colleagues came up from a different department and congratulated me. And now, contemplative studies started off as just a small group of kind of misfits in different departments who thought that communicating, we'd all had contemplative practices of one kind or another, and we felt very strongly that it would be important to communicate these to our students because they had benefited us in many ways. And we started out, what should we call ourselves? We argued back and forth, meditation studies, consciousness studies, ended up with contemplative studies, and what should we be? Well, we're not a department, we're not anyway, we went through the list. The only thing that wasn't defined in the Brown University rules was initiative, so we called ourselves an initiative, Contemplative Studies Initiative. I was surprised because she said, congratulations, you have a whole department. That's kind of baked into the university, long-standing thing. And I was taken aback. She said, well, you have a website, right? And the fact that we had a website somehow legitimated us in a way that was way beyond how we were really existing at the time. Now, this was the floor of we got the use of the dance studio. Still to this day, Brown University has not given us a dedicated meditation space, to their shame. But we would, for the first 15 years or so we were going, we used the dance studio because dancers like to stay up late. Maybe it's true here. Do you have a dance program here? Theater and dance? Yes? And dancers like to stay up late, at least in North America, but they don't like to get up early. So we could use the dance studio if we went in at like 8 or 9 in the morning. So that's what we used, and that was where we would set up Zafa's and Zabuton's meditation cushions. And now, the background for my slides, you can see in the picture on the top, it's the floor of the dance studio. I don't know, I like it as a background. I don't know, maybe other people don't, but. So, as we're developing contemplative studies, it's an emerging field. We identify the varieties of contemplative experiences, the whole spectrum of them. We engage in scientific, philosophical discussions, analysis of them. We cultivate first-person knowledge of them, and then we assess their meaning and significance. What is contemplation? Of course, if you're talking about contemplative studies, you have to define contemplation. The working definition, the focusing of the attention in a sustained fashion, leading to deepened states of concentration, tranquility and insight, a broadening of the awareness, greater understanding of oneself, and what we heard this talked about as pro-social experiences earlier today. I would call them, another way to look at them is self-contextualizing experiences. You understand yourself in the greater context in which you're embedded. And that demonstrate that no matter how much we feel alone as individuals, we are always part of some greater context. And these are the basis for other regarding virtues that people develop, including empathy, humaneness, compassion, loving kindness, and so on. Contemplation occurs on a spectrum, from the rather common spontaneous experiences of absorption in an activity, the experiences which psychologists, and now really out in the general population, based on the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, they call flow. Anybody familiar with the concept of flow? And Csikszentmihalyi's book, really somebody definitely worth reading. Also, the name is really impossible to pronounce. Students, when they give presentations on Csikszentmihalyi's work, usually refer to him as the author. So, on a spectrum that includes these tortured in activity, to the most profound, deliberately cultivated experiences in religious traditions, the ones that we may be more familiar with as being contemplative. In the first category, we have what I would call non-intentional contemplation, the flow experiences. Practices that lead to deeper states of focused attention, but those practices are not done in order to produce those states, at least not consciously. They're done for their own sake. So chess, or various kinds of sports, or rock climbing, or surfing in some cases, and these involve effortless attention. In these practices, there is no conscious or intentional practice of meditation, but they can generate deep attentional focus. And these are some examples of playing chess, rock climbing, and so on. Or other examples. Okay, anybody, you get 10 points for identifying the pitcher. Anybody know?
박찬호.
Who is it?
박찬호.
Oh, how are you? Do you know who the pitcher is? Park Chan-ho, right. At this point in his career, pitching for the Dodgers. So, Major League Baseball players, and I'm sure KBO players will also report this, that they are so much into that they don't. I don't know about KBO, but Major League Baseball, they don't practice meditation, but they get into these states of, they call it getting into the zone, and they can actually see the difference between these 5 different kinds of pitches, based on now. If you follow baseball, you know that some pitchers can throw between 95 and 100 miles an hour, and the pitching mound is 60 feet 6 inches away from home plate. So the ball's on you like that. To be so in the zone that you can actually see where the seams are, as you see in this example. That's to be in the zone. That's a contemplative state. It's on a continuum with deliberately cultivated contemplative practices that we see in meditational traditions. And we need to study them together and not see them as fundamentally different. Meditational practices that are in category 2 in contemplative, among contemplative practices. These are deliberately focused on attaining contemplative states. In secular context, we see that this is often used to improve concentration in the workplace, deeper personal fulfillment in life, and we have seen in the last 2 days a variety of applications, practical applications. But in sacred and religious context, the goal is to realize our full potential as human beings through the experience of non-duality. And integrating that experience into our daily lives. And we see this with meditation traditions, dedicated meditation centers, such as those associated with this university. Now, studying these deep contemplative states, and by the way, this is an interesting picture. Anybody recognize the young man on the left-hand side facing you? You probably don't know. I'm going to introduce him to you. You see who it is on the right? He's sleeping in the front seat, front row, because I've actually put him to sleep. Again, I told you this is a danger of listening to me at this time of day. Here is Dr. Vago, and one of the graduates of our Contemplative Studies program, of whom I'm very proud, Matthew Saket, about to torture another Tibetan Buddhist cleric, which they did a lot in those days, I think, by putting the nun into an fMRI machine. Now, what Matthew Saket is doing, he's now come back to the area, he's at Harvard, and he's studying these advanced states of non-duality, these advanced states of meditation. And in his words, the practices, how these practices unlock the mind's capacity to experience the highest forms of human well-being. These are also very important contemplative practices. So, one of the ways in which I see contemplative studies is that it embraces both intentional contemplative practice, so meditational practices, but also the flow activities that are non-intentional. And that these are related to mindfulness in that mindfulness, and in its most basic definition, and not the one that's very common these days that John Kabat-Zinn set up, but really what it means is that Eric Locke touched upon this yesterday. It's to remember. So I don't know about what the term is in Korean, and probably you transliterate mindfulness now because at least in Chinese, the term really means to remember. And what is it to remember? It's to remember to come back again and again and again when your mind slips to whatever you've decided to focus and concentrate on. Whatever it is in your meditation practice or in your learning how to throw a baseball or to hit a baseball. You have to come back. And often mind wandering, as we know about we've heard from Dave Vago about the default mode network, that minds wander. And we have to come back. And we have to remember to come back again and again and again. And that we can practice that. And then over time, that becomes, we can see the state of mindfulness that we can be in, where without exerting much effort, we can be there. But then sometimes we'll fall out if we're not practicing. But then eventually over time, as you practice more and more, it becomes a trait. And that becomes a trait that stays with you more than it departs from you. The value of continued mindfulness practice over time. So, how do we study contemplative practices at Brown? We look at the general fields of contemplative studies. That includes the sciences, the humanities, the creative arts. How did we start? Starting with probably, again, about 20 years ago, we started to have students major in contemplative studies related programs. One of the first things we did was we established a presence on our campus. Since 2006 until now, we've organized 242 lectures, retreats, concerts, films in the sciences with contemplative practitioners, with philosophers. We've had a lot of, we've been able to generate interest on the campus by bringing specialists in. We established eventually a formal major with a unique pedagogy. And I want to, this is our first graduating class, but I also want to call attention to one of our colleagues that Eric mentioned yesterday. I think maybe Dave included her name in a couple of publications. Kathy Kerr. Along with Willoughby Britton, who we've heard about the last 2 days. Willoughby and Kathy brought contemplative science to Brown, and we worked together to create this full contemplative studies program that involves the humanities and the sciences and practice and education. Kathy very sadly passed away in November 2016, and we really miss her. She was very interested in classical Chinese medicine, and we have a lecture series in her honor that we're still, in fact, I just saw, my colleague Larson D. Fiore is bringing somebody in. All of these are available online, and by the way, please, if you're interested at all, go to our website, our Contemplative Studies website. If you just do a search for Contemplative Studies, you'll find us, and you're welcome to join us for any of these lectures. Time difference may be challenging, but we often have them at night. They'll be the morning for you, so maybe not so bad. Since 2014, when we had a formal major accepted, we have graduated 75 students. These students were in our first graduating class. I'm very, very proud of them. We keep track of what they're doing. in the interest of time, if you can ask me afterwards, and I can go into detail. We're very proud of all of them. In fact, the young woman who is the third person in, she graduated from our program and went to work right away for the Mind and Life Institute, and she was the principal organizer for the Botswana conference in 2017, 2018, that the Dalai Lama almost attended. Politics, Chinese government politics made it difficult. We also served, and I like the concept of an incubator. I learned this from an American television series called Silicon Valley, the idea of an incubator. But in many ways, we incubated a number of programs that developed. One in the medical school, and there's Dr. Laux. Before he's had to deal with the hassles of the Brown administration, which has turned him a little gray, starting to turn gray as a result of his university politics. Thankfully, you professors here don't have to deal with university politics because you practice Zen, so you're beyond university politics. So we're served as an incubator. We've developed, this is actually not a complete listing, 44 new courses that we've added to the curriculum. And just to take a moment to look through them, they include courses taught by Professor Laux, also his colleague Judd Brewer, a course also that Kathy Kerr developed, Cognitive Neuroscience and Meditation, but also a lot of humanities courses. And all of these courses feature what we call meditation labs. So these are labs, again, they're scheduled like laboratory sessions of science courses. So all of these courses have either meet 3 times a week for 50 minutes or twice a week for 50 minutes. And in those labs, students try out contemplative practices that are directly related to what we are reading in that particular week. The major requires 12 courses, 12 of the 30 courses that you have as a Brown undergraduate, or 32 courses maybe, to get a BA. 6 courses we have, using all sites, actually cost 100, doesn't matter. Intro to Contemplative Studies, Introduction to the Field. Every new academic field needs to have its own distinctive methodology and needs to start training people in that methodology. And then students who are doing a sciences track take a minimum of 2 humanities courses that are related and vice versa. Humanities students take at least 2 science courses. And then they also will then do 6 courses in their track, sciences or humanities. And then we also have a way to work the arts in it. Many of our courses teach students basic meditational practices in the context of academic study. However, the problem is that meditation is perceived by many as a religious practice that should not be promoted in a secular university. This is a real challenge, it has been a real challenge for us. Many colleagues and administrators see contemplative studies courses that include contemplative practice as promoting a particular religion, usually Buddhism. And so to counteract that perception, our courses explicitly confirm their critical spirit and empirical nature. What do I mean by that? This is for the first 15 years in our courses, we made this statement. This course is an example of what we call critical first-person learning. Critical, because in many forms of first-person learning in the context of religion, one must suspend critical judgment and believe in the various truths of the tradition. There's an important place for this form of committed first-person learning in our private lives, but we should be careful not to require that kind of commitment in a secular university. By contrast, in In the critical first-person learning, which we do in this course, the need to believe is removed. We will read and analyze a variety of texts. This is what we call third-person learning. I'll speak about that a little more in a minute. We will observe how our minds and bodies work while trying out a variety of simple meditation techniques derived from these texts in laboratory sections scheduled like labs and science courses. We will critically discuss these texts in light of our experiences in the meditation lab. Without doubt, this kind of novel pedagogy is not for everyone. If for any reason the student is unable to participate in the med lab component of the course, we will be happy to make arrangements to do alternative work of equivalent value. So over now the more than 25 years I've been teaching courses like this, I've taught over 2,000 students. Only 2 students during that time have ever taken this option. And I have both required and recommended readings, and I just asked those students to do the recommended readings in addition to the requirements. So, what's it like? What's one of these courses like? What's the pedagogy like? So, as I said, MedLab courses combine traditional third-person study of contemplative practices in their philosophical and historical context. With, third person is what is widely done throughout the academy, universities all over the world. You study the history, you study the culture, you study the tradition, you study the philosophy. We combine those third-person approaches with critical first-person methods, in which students empirically experience and critically examine contemplative techniques. Most importantly, of course, meditation, without prior commitment to their efficacy. Hence, they learn the meditation practices along with their spiritual and cultural cognitive contexts and test them out empirically in the laboratories of their own body minds. This is an example of Intro to Contemplative Studies, in which we study the classical Taoist tradition. And in this first week of the class, we look at primary texts. In this case, we look at a very important. How many of you have heard of the Lao Tzu or the Tao Te Ching? Foundational Taoist work. Definitely important to study. The work that we study in this first week is actually earlier than the Tao Te Ching. At least that's what I argue in my second book. And we study that. We look at secondary scholarship about how to study contemplative traditions. And one of the first important works we read is by Alan Wallace, called The Taboo of Subjectivity. Again, a book that I recommend very highly. Wallace criticizes the way in which subjective experience has been written out of university education, has been written out of scientific research, and in some ways, many ways, has been written out of humanities scholarship as well. And then he makes an argument for why it's important to bring that back in. But at the same time, we study this in a 2.5-hour weekly class meeting. We also have meditation labs in which we try out contemplative practices that are found in the texts themselves. Another example would be in the next week, the Satipatthana that Dave Boggle was talking about, that Eric was talking about. And when we read the Satipatthana Sutta, we actually try out the techniques of the Satipatthana, the foundations of mindfulness. Take a long breath, and we go through that. But then students they're not forced to believe that this is going to make them calmer or more tranquil. If they say, well, it's not working, this is nonsense, it's fine. The most important thing is that they understand what the tradition has said about what are the expectations for experience, and that they're not forced to believe in them. They test them out in the laboratories of their own body mind. It's a wonderful collage photo taken in the dance studio one morning that we were teaching. This is already about 10 or 12, no, this is about 15, more than 15 years ago. It's when I could still cross, when I still had knees, still had my original knees. I had both of them replaced in the last 9 months. So, in meditation labs, we start with some sort of introductory yogic or qigong practice that concentrates on positions that make muscles and joints and ligaments involved in meditation more flexible. Then we work with a contemplative technique for that week, for that lab. Then it's time for questioning, and then there's journaling. Now we do online journaling. So students get a chance to talk about, they try the technique, they relate it to the reading that we're doing, and then they relate it to their own experience, and we discuss it. And so this is based on the kind of rationale for this, is that we have these 4 interactive epistemologies, that is, methods or theories of knowing. We have third-person perspectives, look at things from a distance. Second-person perspective, you engage in direct communication, person-to-person communication, asking questions, responding with answers. First-person perspectives are epistemologies are really subjective experience, which we've now brought into the classroom. And then there's another dimension of first-person subjective experience, and that is what I would like to call no-person experience. That is immediate, non-intentional experience, not processed through a sense of self-identity. It is experience that is non-self-referential. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. Again, this is third-person learning, and these MedLab courses certainly have that. We have second-person learning, intersubjective communication. Deep listening is a practice, a second-person practice. There have been second-person epistemologies that started to be used in scientific research contests developed in France by Claire Petit-Mogine and Michael Bitbol and their group. And then first-person learning experiences, as we see in the med labs. And then no-person learning. So within first-person learning, there is the immediate momentary experience. Sipping tea. Breathing in, breathing out. There's a pure sensation without objectification. The sensation of the entire body without the interference of processing your bodily awareness through your sense of self-identity. No-person epistemologies are spontaneous, uncategorized awareness of the constant flow of immediate experience in the present moment without objectification by the first-person experiencing subject. So there is a kind of continuum of experience, interpretation, experience, objectification that's constantly going on. And it's important to remember that that consciousness is dynamic, and sense of self is dynamic. And interesting, the idea of no self that Dave Vago talked about today. Actually, what it really, I think, always meant is there is no fixed or permanent sense of self or self-identity. The early Buddhist tradition that emphasized no self did so in contrast to the Hindu traditions in the early Hindu texts that said that underlying everything was a kind of deeper self. And for reasons of, I think, practical reasons, early Buddhist teachers thought that if you had a concept of a transcendent self that you were attempting to experience, that would actually block you from having the experience. Having that as a goal, and always you have a tendency to check. It's what I don't know if this is cross-cultural, but when I was a kid, we would take long trips and we'd kind of get bored, and so we would go, "Are we there yet?" Say, "Mom, Dad, are we there yet?" "No, not there yet." "Okay." I think now you have cell phones, kids don't get so bored. But this "are we there yet" phenomenon also can occur with spiritual practice. You know, if you have a goal, you have to be careful that the goal will motivate you to begin with, but it can also block you, because if you're constantly comparing where you are to where you hope to be, it's not going to allow you to get there. Anyway, so this spontaneous, uncategorized awareness, this no-person epistemology, is what I would like to call non-dual cognition. There's no time to talk about one of my colleagues in cognitive sciences, Takeo Watanabe, has developed something called task-irrelevant cognition, or task-irrelevant perception. I think it actually relies on no-person epistemology. It's related to Gilbert Ryle's knowing how. It's related to James Initiative's idea of pure experience. It is palpable, it is embodied. Some of it is subsequently objectified and then cognized through attention, and some of it is not, and forms a kind of background awareness. I think Dave was touching upon this earlier. So non-dual epistemology is knowing or cognition that is independent of the dualistic separation of self and other. It does not depend on a self-concept. In many traditions, including Zen and classical Taoism, this non-dual epistemology is taken to support a non-dual ontology, a theory of being, a theory of something that is foundational in the world. It's kind of part of a philosophical orientation, an explanatory orientation to the experience of non-duality. So this often takes the form of affirming that there is a power, a force, a field, an energy, an entity, a consciousness, a mind, be that monistic, unified or pluralistic or theistic, material or immaterial. There's something, there's a power, force, field that underlies the phenomenal world. And so you have the Tao in the Taoist tradition. You have, in the Stone tradition, true mind. You have the notion of Buddha nature. These are all aspects of non-duality. Also, we start to see this, and Dave was talking about this earlier today. Non-duality is starting to come into scientific research. And in the work of Eric Garland and Yoshi Nakamura that Dave referenced today, we see non-dual awareness has started to be researched. Individuals who, according to them, report more frequent non-dual awareness show a pattern of personal characteristics. They report having a greater capacity to decenter, loosening the boundaries of the self by encouraging a metacognitive perspective in which one disidentifies from self-referential cognitions and thereby de-reifies the self as the subject of experience. More frequently endorsed by individuals who report being non-reactive by virtue of their ability to observe thoughts from a reflective distance. They have high levels of interoceptive, integrated mind-body awareness. Thus, it may be that closely attending to bodily experience encourages NDA. And they've developed a non-duality-based mindfulness practice that has been really successful in treating opioid addiction. Their practice has helped to bring about the same kind of non-attachment to the exclusive perspective of the self that enables what they call non-reactive or non-self-referential metacognition, as Dave was talking about earlier today. And these qualities are precisely what we have been developing in our contemplative study students for the past quarter century. One of the recently published research studies that looked at students in our contemplative studies classes, the study was led by Willoughby Britton and worked with our courses, and they studied our students at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester. And what they really found very dramatic improvements. They actually found that women benefited more than men over the course of the semester, but that both of them actually developed using the 4 factors of mindfulness. And you can see in the graphs, they all ended up having improved experiences. I can't read my own slides at this point, but I hope you can see them. So over the course of the semester, combining first-person practice sessions in the labs with third-person study had a really dramatic effect in improving anxiety, depression, self-criticism, self-judgment, and developing greater awareness. And so what we end up attempting to do, at least at Brown, is develop contemplative intelligence. We have this unique form of studying traditional forms of meditation through, in conclusion, empirical, non-self-referential, no-person epistemology, empirical, self-referential, first-person epistemology, intersubjective, second-person epistemology, academic, third-person epistemology, yielding what we call contemplative intelligence. And we provide students with an introduction to the practice of contemplative methods in a secular setting and to the mind's ability to focus attention at a moment of time of great environmental, global, and political stress. And we train students in the complementary scientific and humanistic study of contemplative practice to better equip them for a whole range of new jobs in the changing workplaces of the 21st century, as well as a foundation for postgraduate study in a number of fields. And we provide them with the tools of contemplative intelligence that will be beneficial to them throughout the rest of their lives. And with that, I want to thank you for your patience at the end of a long day, at the end of a long lecture. And I see that most of you have not fallen asleep, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
네, 멋진 강연 그리고 통찰력 넘치는 여러 가지 말씀 해주셨습니다. 감사드리고요. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. Now we'll begin a Q&A session. I'd like to ask you one of the selected questions now. Question is, some people associate meditation with a specific religion, which may cause challenges when introducing it into public education. What kind of attitude, method, or strategies do you think are necessary in such cases?
Wonderful question. I attempted to address that. Actually, it was this coincidence earlier in talking about what we call the empirical directive. So one of the things that's really important to do is emphasize the empirical nature of the practice. That no matter what your belief system is, coming in, we're not going to force you to take one particular set of truths that surround the practice and adopt them as your own. You can teach you the contemplative practice. We teach you the cognitive framework in which that practice is embedded, which includes doctrines, teachings, and so on, philosophies. We teach you the cognitive framework, but we don't force you to believe in the truth of that cognitive framework. You can try it out, you can test it, you can check it out, you can learn what it is. But that's a fundamental problem. That's one of the issues that we received a lot of pushback from colleagues on. It is that they could not conceive of doing a contemplative practice in the classroom in a setting like that, in a way that doesn't force people to. In fact, the people who ran the department I was in, the Department of Religious Studies, at the time I first started coming out of the closet as a contemplative teacher, contemplative practice teacher, they said, forcing your students to do a meditation practice in the classroom is no different from forcing them to get down on their knees and accept Jesus as their Savior. And I went, well, I'm not forcing them to do that. I'm not forcing them to believe in anything that they can't test out in the crucible, in the lab of their own body-mind. And they went, that's not possible. And I said, well, come to class. You know, they actually tried to they actually tried to force me to stop teaching. Not only any course with a contemplative practice component, they said, you can't teach any courses on Buddhism. But you see, by the time I had come out of by the time I started doing this, I'd already gotten tenure, and I don't know if that's something you know about here, but my job wasn't really threatened. All they could do is reduce my annual salary, which of course they were happy to do. But the thing is that in doing any kind of innovation and developing the kind of research that we've heard about from the scientists who work on contemplative practice, you have to have patience. You know, and Mahayana Buddhism talks about the perfections of the Bodhisattva, and two of them are the perfection of patience, Kshanti Paramita, and the perfection of persistence. You have to be patient and persistent and be willing to play the long game. So with that in mind, it's very important to emphasize the empirical nature. And that, you know, you can have a kind of, what I would call a kind of explanatory democracy, where a lot of people, I know in your country here, in our country, really feel democracy is very important. Political democracy is very important. I also think explanatory democracy is very important. Always what comes first and foremost is our experience. There's this dialectic going on, a recursive relationship going on between experience and interpretation, experience and explanation. But as somebody starts a practice, as somebody develops a practice, you have to give them the freedom to choose which explanation they think most suits their own empirical experience.
Thank you. Next question is, if meditation studies become established in university and students continue their practice, what kind of influence and value do you think this could have beyond the university in families, communities, and society at large?
I think, as I think all of our speakers believe fervently, that the work that we're doing in colleges and universities will move out into the larger communities that surround us. That it has the potential to, in the various contexts in which we live, to help people appreciate the fundamental interrelatedness with one another as human beings, with one another as creatures in the world, manifesting what our first speaker yesterday talked about as Indra's net, this deep fundamental interrelatedness among all life. And I think what it helps to do is reduce attachment to a fixed sense of self-identity. And therefore, it also reduces attachment to a particular set, a version of self-identity, of ways of looking at things. And so you can respond spontaneously in the moment to whatever situation is arising. So it gives you a flexibility, a sense of fluidity that is also important for people to have in the world. I think as we end the conference, I want to take the opportunity to remind all of you that each and every one of us, each and every one of you, is this unique confluence of forces, events, influences, karmic forces, if you will. That we all have flowing cells with a unique and ever-changing window on the world. Be open to practice. Be open to meditational and contemplative practices. They have the potential to transform our flowing cells so that each of us may attain the universal longing of all human beings and all creatures, that in the words of my late and lamented friend, the Canadian poet Leonard Cohen, like a bird on a wire, like a drunken sub-midnight choir, I have tried in my way to be free. And with that, thank you very much.
One question, thank you so much. 네, 멋진 강연과 답변 감사드립니다. 지금까지 해럴드 로스 박사님이셨습니다. 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 우리가 뭐 일반적으로 명상, 집중, 몰입, 성찰 뭐 이런 용어들을 한국어로 많이 쓰는데요. 오늘 그 성찰에라는 개념을 가지고 성찰의 정의, 그 개념 속에서 우리가 하는 명상의 위치, 좌표를 한번 조명해봤습니다. 우리 해럴드 로스 박사님께서는 그 북미대학 최초로 학부과정에 지금 명상학부를 개설을 해서 활발한 활동을 이어오고 계십니다. 네, 이로써 제6회 서울국제명상엑스포 명상콘퍼런스 모든 일정을 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 유익하고 알찬 강연을 준비해 주신 연사님들, 함께해 주신 청중 여러분들, 그리고 명상 컨퍼런스를 준비해 주신 모든 분들께 감사드립니다. 휴식 시간을 가진 후 오늘 저녁 7시부터는요 음악과 명상을 함께 느낄 수 있는 선명상 콘서트 마음이 깊어지다 프로그램이 이곳 남산홀에서 준비되어 있습니다. 무료 참여로 진행됩니다. 많은 관심으로 멋진 공연 또한 함께 해주시기를 부탁드립니다. 돌아가시는 길 안녕히 그리고 안전히 돌아가시길 바랍니다. 감사합니다. 지금까지 사회 AI 투리즘 연구소장 동일이었습니다. 감사합니다.